Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations. I got to take some water here. Wait, I've been talking for 5 hours. Not to Stuart Jaffe, but I've been talking for 5 hours, being interviewed myself and another one. So I'm losing my voice. Welcome to Conversation with Calvin Weeder Species. I'm honored and thrilled to be talking to Stuart Jaffe, a very prolific. Actually, you called yourself a madman in what you sent me. So I'm just gonna, without knowing you intimately well, Stuart Jaffe is the madman behind the Max Porter, which is behind you, the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, which is 19 volumes, which is beyond 19 volumes. And I was doing my due diligence, Stuart, and I was looking, I was kind of snooping around Amazon, and I saw the book Tell Me a Secret, uh, um, and it's number 8 on Amazon, as a category vampire mysteries. So you are, I don't know if you knew that. I'm telling you something you don't know. Well, well, whatever. Is that you? Did I look up the wrong thing? Could be.
The book is called Tell Me a Secret. That's not me, but
Wow.
I
By the
mean,
way, and on Amazon there's a whole list of your books.
oh yeah.
And that's where I got these pictures from, and that was there, and I'm looking down. Oh, whatever. Uh, hey, whatever. So,
I've
but
written a
anyway,
lot of books, so sometimes they go into the lists and get to the
okay,
top, and I'm not sometimes aware of it, sometimes I'm not.
okay. I have to go back and look later. But anyway, you've done the Max Porter and the Midnight Mysteries, the Parallel Society, the Pathway Ring series, which we're going to talk about now because I think that's your newest.
Hmm.
Okay. So, you're actually, you just told me, as we were chatting, before we went on air, you're a Jersey guy. Not for a long time,
Originally.
but you can never take that Jersey stuff out. It's there. It's stuck. It's like quicksand. It
Yeah.
grabs you and it holds you. And that's another little bond. In fact, you're an author and hybrid, and we can talk about agents. It seems you despise agents as much as I do. Um, uh, Another story for another day. But I'm really thrilled you're here, and I'm thrilled we got connected. So, um, how about doing a little background, a little bar, and then we're gonna jump into your world. Take it away.
Well, you did a good job all on your own. Yeah, I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, 19 books and still going. I've been a professional writer for about 30 years. I've written over 60, getting close to 70 some novels,
Wow.
hundreds of short stories. And I was originally from Jersey, lived there for 13 years. I've lived in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in California. About 20 some years ago, my wife and I moved down to the South. My wife was doing her master's degree at Wake Forest University. And it was during that period that I started learning about the history of the area I was living in. And that's pretty much what started the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries because they are fictitious stories about a couple that moves down to the South. And they discover his office is haunted by the ghost of a 1940s detective. So they start a detective agency with the ghost, and I take real history of the area and mix it with witches, ghosts, curses, and magic.
Wow. Wow. Hey, when we go off air, I got to tell you my ghost story. I told you some, but
It's
it's I,
I'm happy to hear it. It's just fun. I'm laughing because I have heard many people come up to me at conventions and things and like, this is what happened to me, and they tell me their story.
yeah, it's wild. And again, I'm just a regular guy, but I've had some really interesting ghosts. We did real paranormal investigations in an old um, uh, in an old from the 1800s building.
Mhm.
And then I attended another paranormal investigation in the home of William Franklin. That was Ben's son.
Okay.
who was a British supporter. He was colonial governor of New Jersey in the 1700s. And so when he was colonial governor and everything was cool, we didn't revolt. He built this wonderful 4 or 5 story mansion for himself in Perth Amboy that became, and of course, he was kicked out of America because he was a British supporter. And I guess
Mhm.
in deference to Ben, they didn't do anything more to him. They just kicked him out. But that place has been dramatically haunted all these hundreds of years, and I've done a couple. I've attended ghost. I don't want to talk about that. Let's. I get such. I'm very exuberant, and because I'm talking to an expert here, and I'm just a dabbler. You
I'm a
know.
writer.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. I'm not. I wouldn't call myself an expert in the paranormal. I'm just an expert in lying about the paranormal.
Okay, whatever. Hey, you know what? It all works because who the hell knows, you know? So let's get started with your latest series. It's called The Pathway Ring, which is an you call it it is an epic science fiction story.
Mhm.
Why did you choose to write like a science fiction thing after years of writing fantasy?
So, yeah, so science fiction was my first love. I grew up, with Star Trek and Star Wars as a major part of my life, and so I always loved that. And the first decade of my writing career was short stories. I predate my career predates indie publishing as a viable thing. So back in the day, the way you would build a writing career, especially in the science fiction and fantasy field, was you'd write short stories and get in magazines like Asimov's and Analog, that kind of thing, and maybe some anthologies, and then you get an agent, and then if you're lucky, you get a publishing deal. And kind of that's the ladder you had to work. So I originally did a lot of science fiction and I dabbled in fantasy. And then, but then really the first couple novels I wrote were science fiction. The first professionally publishable novel I ever wrote was science fiction, and almost got published. It was a case of there back. This is going back quite a ways. There was a company, Warner Brothers had a science fiction imprint called Warner Aspect, and my agent sent my book. It's called After the Crash, and it was sent to Warner Aspect, and they basically came back and said, "We love it, and we would love to publish it, but 2 weeks earlier, we bought a book to fit that same slot, so there was no space for my book." And but that even a writing career today, you have to learn how to make rejections positive. So it was sad that I didn't get the book sold, but the positive thing was I now knew for sure that I was writing at a professional level. Uh, as I started putting out books, I wrote some fantasy books, and they were the ones that kicked off, especially Max Porter. And you kind of there's the artistic side of your life as a writer, and there's the business side. And the business side said, this is what people are buying. That's what I need to be working on. And so I spent years writing this stuff and writing other kind of urban fantasy and various types of fantasy series. A couple of those series came to a conclusion recently, and about this was 2 years ago. I run a newsletter, and I haven't done it in a while, but for a while, every year I would start the year off with a survey that the people could participate in and see what they are interested in and that kind of thing. And I asked them, I said, I'm finishing up these series. What do you want me to write next? Because I had no specific story in mind. And I gave them some suggestions like, do you want me to do science fiction or fantasy? Or I think one of them was something with dragons. It was science fiction, something with dragons, and some other things. And the science fiction and the dragons came out at the top two, pretty much neck and neck. So I decided, okay, I decided to do the science fiction story first, and that came about specifically because I'd actually been trying to write this specific story for about 10 years. I'd start to and it wouldn't work, and then I'd start to and then it work. Then I actually wrote an entire novel called The Pathway Ring. And part of my process, I will read out loud my book to my wife. And at the time when my son was young and living in our house, he would often sit in and listen as well. So I was reading them this book, and it's the only time this has ever happened in reading a book to them where I didn't even get halfway through the book and they were just peppering me with questions. They're like, this doesn't make sense. Why this? I'm confused about this. And it became evident that this book was not working.
Wow.
So I listened to what they had to say. I took some notes and I said to myself, I'm going to set this aside. I've got a Max Porter book and some other stuff I need to write. I will come back to this in maybe 6 months or a year, take a look at it and see what's what. And eventually the people are like, oh, we want this science fiction book. So I pulled it out, and it had been 5 years had gone by magically. I don't know where they went, but 5 years had gone by. But I'm 5 years wiser as an author, and I looked at the books, and within seconds, I was like, oh, I can see all these flaws. And part of the reason that book wasn't working is because I tried to cram 4 to 5 books into one. And so I realized that what I really was trying to write, and I describe it as an epic science fiction story, is because it is a multi-generational story that follows one family through centuries as they are at the heart of the building of the first ever Stargate in space, which they call the Pathway Ring. And so they build this thing. In the first book, they build it. Some of them go through it, and when you go through a Stargate's like a bit like a wormhole capture, right?
Right.
It stabilizes a wormhole. So then you go through and are popped out somewhere else in another galaxy or maybe part of our own. Who knows where you end up? And if you ever want to get back, you got to build the other half of it, the other end of the tunnel. And so, with that as kind of the backdrop, we watch this family go through all their lives and their losses and their dramas, as well as first contact with aliens and political revolts and all kinds of drama that follows this through. So it's basically for people who read outside of science fiction and fantasy, I often say it's Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth meets Stargate.
I like that. I like that. Um, well, you see me taking notes. As we're talking, I'm taking notes and things to talk about.
Go ahead.
So and I'm curious about this as a writer. Loosely, I call myself a writer, but what types of writing do you find easy or difficult to write?
For me, and I've been writing a long time, so a lot of it becomes easier just through practice. But action, adventure, all that kind of stuff, that was my initial love. That's what I focused on. And that's very easy for me to write. The thing that's difficult for me to write is romance, and that's something I've been working at and trying to get better at. So I don't intend to ever write a romance novel, but I think it's good to have to not have characters who have no interest in love or sex or anything like that. And you can see in my early novels, there'll be a sex scene, and they're just admittedly not very well written. And I learned over time, I basically started fading to black, and I still do that. I pretty much, when I say I want to write romance, I'm not really. I've discovered I'm not interested in writing sex scenes, but I am interested in writing characters who care about each other, fall in love, and have those moments. And those are difficult to write and have them not be cheesy, for me at least. And obviously for romance writers, those are easy. I've done do a convention. I'm going to be doing it the second time now, called Coastal Magic. And it originally began as a romance writers convention, but then they started adding in us crazy fantasy people. And I went to the first one earlier this year, and it was fascinating because we were all help that all the romance writers wanted to know how I write all the action, and I wanted to know from them how do they write the meet cute or the breakup or the excuse me, the longing for each other and making that work. And so yeah, that's the difficulty for me. But I think I'm getting better at it, and it just adds such a nice extra dimension and layer to the characters and to the stories. Um,
Yeah.
and especially so I've been married for 30 years and I've been with my wife for 35 years. So in the Max Porter series, Max and his wife Sandra have always they've been in a long, solid marriage. That kind of romance I can write easily because I live it.
Live it.
but but it's all the other stuff that I've forgotten.
Yeah. I listen, I identify with that because when I was writing, I always I always show this when I'm writing this, I wanted to put in some stuff off topic from so I made some stuff up and like try to come up with some dialogue and it's funny when I was done I and it was time for my wife to kind of proofread it. I sat her down and I said, there's some imagination here, just so you know. And sometimes where does it come from? I said, well, it's imagination. I'm just, imagination, and you watch TV and you read and you absorb, and it's just imagination. And I had to make sure my whole family knew about that, um, because I have an imagination. So, Stuart, you plot your novels out before writing them. So do I,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact. Where others like Stephen King, he just writes as he goes along. So, why do you like to write things from?
Why am I a plotter?
Yeah, why are you a plotter? Yeah.
For me, a big part of it now is just efficiency. I put out on an average year, probably 3 to 4 books a year. As an indie author, unless you hit it big, if you want to do this as a full-time living, which is what I do, you have to keep putting stuff out. People they want it. And if you, especially when you're first starting out, if you are only putting out a book a year, they'll forget about you
Wow.
and they move on. And it's not that they maybe dislike the book. You may, when they're reading your book, they may think this is the greatest writer I've ever read. I love him. They finish the book. The next thing on their mind is, well, what else does he have? And if you don't have anything else, because you only have 1 or 2 books, they're just going to move on to, think of yourself as a reader. When I finish a book, if there's nothing else to read, I'm still going to keep reading. So I find a different author and I move on. And I've had this happen where I finish a book and I'm like, I don't know what I'm in the mood for. And I start thinking about authors and I'll be like, oh, so and so. I haven't looked. It's been 2 years since I've read anything by them. Let me see if they have something new out. But there are plenty of readers who never have that thought again. They just keep moving with what they've got. So, uh, so I need to keep producing books is essentially what it is. And for me, part of that efficiency of plotting, there are a lot of advantages to plotting, and that's a whole conversation I'm happy to have. But in the short, the best thing about plotting is every morning when I go to write on whatever book I'm writing, I don't stare at a blank screen. I pull up the book, I can pull up my outline and say, here's what I have to write today. And now I can go start, and my outlines are not like detailed to the core. They where there are people who famously like Terry Brooks, who wrote the Shannara series. He for a 600-page novel, he might have a 300-page outline. Mine isn't like that. Mine are like chapter, 3, Joe and John fight. John wins. Now I have to figure out how I'm going to make that happen. But I'm now focused on that, and so it's just really a way to keep the thing moving. When the muse hits and I go off script, I know where the outline has me going, so I can either do where the muse has taken me and then work my way back onto track, or I can reject what I planned originally and go on a new direction and kind of replan. But it's just a way to keep things moving
Right.
for me.
No, interesting. Well, for me too. Listen, I've done two, and both of them have been such detailed outlines. Now I'm writing my third, as I mentioned to you, I think before we went on air, the 10 things I learned from a billionaire, and this is my outline. I just
Mhm.
these little circles are chapters. Boom, 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 boom. My just so that and it's funny. I told my I'm collaborating with Kay Wagner, and I said I have to have a plot. I have to have an outline. I can't I can't write any other way. So I understand what you're saying. Um, I like this question too because it hits home for me, and I love hitting home. I like hitting home runs, but I like hitting home. You're a hybrid author, meaning you publish both traditionally and as an indie author. Why did you choose that particular route? 'Cause that's kind of rare. It's one or the other.
Well, as is true, I think for most writers, you don't really choose your career; it just kind of happens. Um, as I mentioned earlier, when I started, there was indie publishing was not a viable way to go. They didn't really exist. There was no ebooks at the time. And so I had gotten to a point where I had a good agent. Everything I wrote went to the head of Tor, which is the largest publisher of science fiction and fantasy in the world. It also went to the other big science fiction fantasy publishers. And I'd get the same response. I'd get, hey, we love his books. We love his characters. We love his writing. Love, 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 love. We're not going to buy it over and over and over.
Wow.
And it took me a long time to even understand what that meant. And the short answer is that meant, yeah, I'm writing at a professional level, but they don't think that it's a commercial enough book to sell, 100,000 copies or whatever. They don't want to take the chance on it. I reached a point where I was going to quit. I figured, I've bashed my head against this wall enough. Clearly, I'm writing well, but the ideas in my head they don't think are commercial. And how much longer can I do this before I can't? I have a family. I've got to make money. I got to make a living. So I was going to quit, and at that point indie publishing like KDP, the ebooks had been around a little bit. KDP blasted the whole thing wide open, letting people publish on Amazon. So I thought, well, I have a decade's worth of short stories. I'll take 10 of the best of them, put them together and create a book. I created a book called 10 Bits of My Brain,
Oh,
and I put it out there just to see what this whole thing is. And the first moment I sold a book that I could not identify who bought it. It wasn't my mother or my brother or anybody. I had no idea who bought that book. I suddenly felt all the joy and excitement I felt when I had first started writing and getting just anybody to read your thing. It just changed everything. And at that point, I said, well, that's it. I'm going indie all the way, and I will never work with a publisher again. And I did for many, many, many years. And I really had no intention of looking back. I love indie publishing. The freedom of it is it's like indie anything, indie filmmaking, indie rock. You see if you read indie published books, you will find all these gems in there of people taking chances that the big publishers will never take. And it's where the exciting stuff happens. I became a hybrid publisher because I as my career grew, I realized there is a value to traditional publishers, small press and even and large press, in that they are a advertising source because they take a huge cut of what you make. So the question is isn't what are you going to do for them? It's what are they doing for you that you're going to pay them this cut? And I should say this hushed because for some reason, even we're now, I don't know, getting close to 20 years into the indie publishing movement. And thankfully, the big publishers have yet to figure any of this out because the minute they figure out what's really going on, uh, they could put us all out of business. But they keep insisting on doing it their way, and I'm happy about that.
Good.
But for me, it's that they can be. It's I wanted access to their readers, so there's this. I started working with some small presses, and once you have that freedom of being an indie author, being a hybrid author is so much easier because you go to sit down with the traditional press, and if you don't like the deal, you can walk away and go right back to publishing what you got. Whereas in the old days, if Tor offered me a crappy deal, I was stuck with it, or this is the only career you've got. If you don't take this, you're done, essentially. So yes, so I would meet with them, and I'm very upfront when I do a contract negotiation with them, and I said, look, I don't need your ability to make a beautiful book. I got plenty of them, right? I want access to your readership. That's what I want out of this. So I will craft my contracts to reflect that. And if we can't come to an agreement on how they're going to give me that access, what type of advertising, and of course with small presses, they have very limited budgets. So I mean, I have to be understanding about that. But if they can't do anything for me more than I can do for myself, then the deal doesn't happen. And so I've had a couple times I've worked with small presses and I'm still open to it, but they're limited because of that. In fact, the only thing I have coming up that I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but I'm working on a project with a Eisner Award winning illustrator. We're mixing his illustrations with my books, with my story in a very unique way for a horror novel. And we both agreed that the only way we'll do this is if we can get a traditional publisher to pick it up because it's going to be a very complicated thing to put together. Neither of us is willing to, we both have careers. So the amount of time it's going to take to put this book together means I can't put other books out because I'll be working on this. And so we want to have a contract where we know we're making some money regardless of what happens with it, and that it's going to get a major boost from being with a traditional publisher. So that's something, but those are I think for most beginning writers, I strongly recommend for your first couple books, just go indie. I mean, if your dream is to be traditionally published, then do that. But if you're trying to build a career, you will, at the very least, even if you hate going indie, like if you hate the experience, you'll know why you hate it, and you'll know what is of value from a traditional publisher and what isn't to you. So uh, there's a that crosses a lot of it. There's tons of other reasons. Again, we could probably do this whole interview on this subject.
Wow. And maybe
But
we will come back to this stuff because I'm sitting here and I keep rattling off notes. I don't know how many, Johnny Carson never took notes, and I'm rattling off 2 pages of notes here because this is so priceless and because you're in the belly of the beast. Uh,
yeah,
uh, that was a good book. Um, I mean, that was a great book. So, but this is priceless stuff, and I'm so fascinated by this because, I'm in the belly of the beast. By the way, it's funny you said Eisner. My son won the Eisner 5 summers ago.
that's awesome.
As a matter
Congrats.
of fact, I'm gonna give my son a little. My son, my son edited and contributed to this Puerto Rico Strong. He got together with 8 of his Puerto Rican friends, and they're all writers and comic book people. And my son Neil
Hmm.
Schwartz, and they did this after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. So they told stories,
Sure.
and this sold out twice on Amazon. And that summer he won the Eisner Award for this.
Awesome.
Kind of so, but anyway, do you have any indie authors that we should pay attention to? Do you have a little thing up
Oh,
here?
sure. I mean, there's for one of the cool things and one of the not so cool things about the indie movement is there's now a million authors out there. And so there's so many indie authors that I can't even know them all. But the people who I can mention, and in full disclosure, they're friends. I know them, and so I know very well intimately their writing. But certainly John G. Hartness. These are all in the fantasy realm that I
Okay.
write in. He writes both humorous stuff like Bubba the Monster Hunter, which is southern, real redneck southern monster hunting, as well as the Quincy Harker series, which is vampires, a take on the further world of Dracula's vampire hunter Harkness. There's also Darren Kennedy is a good friend of mine. He writes um, a lot of music inspired fantasy. One of his probably his best selling trilogy is called the Fugue and Fable series, and it's this like psychological dreamscape kind of murder mystery. It's about this kid who witnesses a murder and he ends up going into getting locked in his own head, and it follows the psychic who has to go into his head and try and pull him out. But the kid was raised on Russian classical music, and so inside his head, it's all like the first book is called the Mussorgsky Riddle, and it's all Mussorgsky wrote scenes of an exhibition. I think that's the name of the piece. And so all the different pieces, parts of that music are like build the world in his head that she has to go through. It's a really, really cool idea. And then there's also other hybrid authors, people like AJ Hartley, who's a New York Times bestseller, USA Today bestseller, big. I mean, he's been around for a while, but he also writes indie stuff as well. He does both. And his indie stuff is remarkable. He wrote a book called Impervious, which at the time AJ was a professor at UNC here in North Carolina. He's a theater professor, and if you remember quite a few years back now, there was a shooting at USC at UNC Charlotte. He was teaching that day. He had
Well,
to take all his kids and lock them down in a room, and
mm,
they didn't know if they were going to live or die. They didn't know what was going on. It was a very traumatic thing. And so he wrote this book partially as therapy for himself, to just kind of process what had happened. And it's a novella, and so novellas are hard to sell anyway. And so he couldn't really get a major publisher to take it. So he indie published it through he essentially indie published it. He did it through a very small press at the time, and it's a really cool book. So I recommend that. I know others like David B. Coe, who also writes as DB Jackson. He's also a hybrid author who's more and more doing stuff, especially taking some of his he used to write for Tor years ago.
uh-huh.
A lot of those books have gone out of print. He's getting the rights back little by little. And when he gets them back, he's releasing them himself as an indie author. So you can get them as indie books and completely support the author now. And they're off, his Winds of the Foreland series is one of my favorite epic fantasy stories and series, and I recommend that too. So those are some off the top of
That's
my head.
great. Wow. You are encyclopedic. Well, you are. And
There are there are so many other authors.
I'm
My apologies
sure.
to all my friends I didn't mention.
I'm sure. And listen, when somebody wins the Academy Award, they always leave out a name or two. So be it, you know. A little off topic. Um, Here goes. You can come up with one answer, two, three. Stuart Jaffe, remember that TV show, This Is Your Life? Maybe you're too young.
No, I know of it. Yeah,
Okay. Well, this is your life. So, Stuart, excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead, you'd like to spend the day with? It could be one or two answers, whatever. Just
Somebody living or dead,
you'd like to spend the day
anybody?
with. It could be anybody. I mean, no family, no friends, but and by the
Um,
way, this could be fantasy.
Yeah. Well, no. So I've been asked that before in terms of fiction, like which of my characters would I love to be, that kind
Ah,
of thing. My fiction never. I never want to be with anybody from fiction because as writers, our job is to make the lives of a person in fiction horrible. They're hard, even the cool ones. I never would want to hang out with Indiana Jones. God, the guy gets shot at all the time, and you know, but I certainly would love to. I wouldn't mind spending an afternoon with Stephen King. That would be really cool. Get to hear how his brain ticks. There's some musicians. I play blues guitar
yeah,
and classic
right,
rock.
right.
So there's certainly numerous musicians. I think he's dead now. BB King, I would have loved to have gotten to hang out with, play a little bit with, and Ray Charles. Both BB King and Ray Charles I got to see play shortly before they died. So I felt honored that at least happened. And Stevie Ray Vaughan, I'd love to have played with him. So yeah, I mean, I could name people like that
Sure.
all day.
Okay. Funny, I read that you do some blues stuff. I just this morning secured myself a ticket to see Anthony Big A Sherrod, a blues guy from Clarksdale, Mississippi. He's coming up to Jersey. I
Awesome.
saw him 2 years ago, and actually, I did a promo and interviewed a bunch of people who were responsible for bringing him up. He's like legendary down there,
Hmm.
Delta. And I saw him 2 years ago, and it just kind of blew me away. And then this morning, I was interviewed by Rick Delarada, who's an incredible jazz pianist. Um,
Hmm.
so I kind of love that. And he talked about indie. For a year and a half, I co-hosted Rock on Radio with Danny Coleman, um, purely for indie artists, singers, songwriters, bands, all indie stuff. So indie is flows through my veins. But good answer. Okay. Um, so your best-selling series, the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, 19 books. Series is still going strong. How do you keep such a long-running series fresh and vibrant?
Um, a couple ways. A big part of it is challenging myself. And this is probably true of any book I write. Is when you write your first book, the challenge is just, can you even write a book, right? And then when you write, if you write the first book of a series, the second book, the challenge is how do you write a second book in a series? How does that even work? Um, at book 19, there are, or now it'll be book 20, it'll be the next one. I'm always looking for a new way to challenge myself with anything I'm writing. Is How do I explain this better? Look, when you're first learning to write, say you have a character walk into a room, and it's a challenge to figure out, how do I write that experience? How do I describe the room without it being too much or not enough? And what do I focus on? And there's a million questions going through your head. I've written, between the short stories and the books, I've written people walking into rooms so many times that I literally could improv it right now without even a second thought. And if I'm writing it within the context of an actual piece where I'm focused on specific things happening, it's even easier to write. So the writing of that description of that is not difficult. But so I try to find challenges in other ways. We talked earlier. I'm trying to learn how to write romance a little bit better, and so that's been a challenge at times. One of the challenges with Max Porter is that now that I'm 19 and about to be 20 books into this,
Oof.
I don't have a lot of frames of reference to help me. When you're writing that first book, there are mountains and mountains of how-to videos on YouTube of books you can buy to tell you how to write your first book. And second books, there are the same amount of book mountains of information, plus all the authors you hopefully know by that point who can say, oh, yeah, here's how you write a second book. There are not that many people who have written a series out as far as I have. And the ones that are like well known, a lot of those authors are dead. So I find myself in this problem of like, okay, how do I keep this going and keeping it fresh? And I can read and look at how other authors have done it and try to analyze their work. But I only know one or two authors know well enough that I can call them up and talk to them about it. Excuse me.
Okay.
So, so that's been a big part of it. And for me, a big part of that challenge is, or a big part of meeting that challenge is focusing on the characters and change. The core characters are always going to be there, right? Will never die and be out of the story. It's called the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries. His wife is always going to be there because that's part of what differentiates this series from any other. He doesn't have a new gal every book. He and his wife are a solid team. And the ghost detective that they team up with will always be there. That trio cannot leave. They are the book. They are the series. Everybody else is fair game. They can come and go. And so that helps kind of keeping it fresh, is bringing in new faces and easing out older faces, which is another challenge because I have characters who have become fan favorites and they don't want to see him go. So I have one character who anybody who's been reading the series this long knows this one character is going to die. She's old. She has MS. She's slowly going to pass away. But she didn't have MS until about, or didn't know she had it, because I didn't know she had it until like 4 books ago. I've been planning this death for a while. And rather than just spring it on, and, I could have had her, I don't know, shot in one book, but everybody would have been like, wait, what do you mean you killed her? She's my favorite character, or, love to hate her, or whatever it is. But the way I've handled it is that it's been happening for several books now. So when her death comes, and it is coming in either the next book or the one after that, it won't be a shock. It'll be expected, and we can move on with the next character, with the other characters.
Okay. Okay. Off topic. We can have some fun with this, I think. Um, Favorite movies.
That's a long list.
It's a long list. Well, you can throw a few out. And, 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 and there's a reason why I asked you that, and we'll get into that.
Favorite horror movie would be The Exorcist. Favorite science fiction movie would be, it's probably still the original Star Wars, which is technically fantasy, but it's science fiction. More recently, in fantasy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is still amazing. What else? I love gangster movies, and so I don't know if I could say a favorite, but I certainly love The Godfather, and Goodfellas is right up there. Um, I love westerns, and again, it just depends on the flavor I'm in the mood for. So on the one hand, you have like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and on the other hand, you have Unforgiven, which is the other end of that spectrum, but I love them both. Um, I also love samurai films, so anything Akira Kurosawa did back in the day that I loved. Yeah, there's a bunch for you to play with.
Okay, so um, I'm an old, I mentioned Casablanca and From Here to Eternity
Oh, sure. I
Wuthering
can even get
Heights.
into Hitchcock films and all that. I can go back into that
Oh, I mean,
easily as
North
well.
by Northwest, I just love, love, love. I
Yeah.
watch that all the time. Wuthering Heights, when I'm in when I'm in a kind of a down mood. It's funny. My son was about 7 or 8 years old, and I got him into watching Ghostbusters
Hmm.
and Animal House. I kind of broke the rules and got him to watch that. And I remember one time. I wanted him to watch on Channel 43 AMC on Sunday morning. Wuthering Heights was on, so I went to him, and he was like about 8 years old. I said, "Daddy's going to watch a ghost movie." It's not a ghost movie, but the last scene when Heathcliff
Right,
and
right, right, right.
Kathy are walking on the snowy, they're ghosts.
Yeah,
And so I made this poor 8-year-old watch the whole thing, and he kept saying, "Where's the ghosts? They're coming, they're coming." And at the end, they're the ghosts. And the following day in school, the teacher asked the kids, what they did over the weekend. And he raised his hand and he said, "I watched Wuthering Heights." So you can imagine that
that's
coming
just,
out of an
yeah.
8-year-old. It was kind of funny stuff. So
I
here's the next part of my
just
question.
remembered another great movie that is
Yes.
a recent movie, well, relatively, is Quentin Tarantino's Inglorious Bastards. Because if you're going to kill Hitler,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm all
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah. I actually like, I watch Pulp Fiction often.
Great movie, yeah,
Great movie. Great mind, truly. So back in the 50s, I watched Forbidden Planet.
yeah. Uh-huh.
And that has resonated with me over the decades because I thought that was brilliant. Because there's all kinds of stuff being done with the mind and expanding the mind. And here you had the Krell has expanded their mind, and then they were gone. So there's so many parallels to our world today, translating to, and that's why I thought that movie was brilliant, and even the special effects, brilliant. The id, that monster of the id,
Mhm.
and I mean all of that. So I was so intrigued by all of that, and of course it was a predecessor of all this stuff about AI. So my question, and I'm trying to frame this up for you, Stuart. I go back as AI has exploded over the last couple of years. And I remember Arthur Clarke in 2001, and I remember Hal taking over the spaceship, and when the astronaut says
Mhm.
close
Close
the
the pod doors.
close the pod doors, and Hal doesn't want to do that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's the first slap in the face. That's the first taste of AI back then. So my question, now oversimplified, is how do you feel about AI?
AI. Excuse me. It's a love-hate thing. One of the joys of being doing all the science fiction and fantasy conventions is I've gotten to know people who work for NASA as well as people who work in the AI field. And there's a lot to unpack and understand. We call it AI, but it really isn't. It's a misnomer. But the problem by calling it AI is people think it's far more capable than it is, and than it ever will be, as it is built right now. So, um, as a tool, it can be very useful in the sense that we've already been using it for years. So if you use Word, for example, or any word processor, and you have it do a spell check or a grammar check, that's an AI, right? It's the same type of thing that is working for you, and I'm fine with that. That's a tool. Those are awesome, and we use them to do all kinds of very complicated um, um, medical or astronomical mathematical equations that one human brain just could not do on its own. Perfect. Bringing it once AI started getting into the artistic realm is when things got kind of fuzzy and weird and wrong. The wrong part of it, of course, I'm sure you've heard, you're aware of this, is that to train the AI, they stole all of our work. They just did it, and we're never going to get paid for that. And it really sucks. So you could go on AI and say, write a Max Porter book, write a book in the style of Stuart Jaffe's Max Porter, and it can do it. And there's nothing I can do about that. and there's always people, idiots out there who are going to use this to write books, and they're already doing it. And the problem is not that, how do I say this? The problem I have with it is the possibility of it becoming so ubiquitously done that nobody wants to read books anymore. Who people who like, because there's no value to it. Because we have to understand a couple things going on here. First of all, the people who are doing this are not writers. They are before AI. You'd meet people like this all the time and at events and things. These are the people who would come up to you and say, "I got a great idea. You write it, and we'll split the money." Right? This kind of thing. And basically, these are people who, or they would hire ghostwriters. These are people who don't want to write a book. They want to have written a book. They want to be able to have their name on the book and be able to say and be able to be at a party and be like, oh, I'm an author. Look what I've done. But they don't actually want to do the work. It's a shortcut. That's part of it. It's also the same mentality people have always and still mistakenly think that writing is the way to fame and riches. It is not. Yes, there are outliers like Stephen King or Brandon Sanderson or whoever, the flavor of the month is the moment. Yes, there are people who make a lot of money doing it, but they are the exception. Uh, Again, before the indie thing, I would speak at a class or whatever, and I'd say, go to your local Barnes and Noble or back then Borders. Look at all those books. There are 1,000, 2,000 titles in that store, whatever it is. If I'm being generous, 95%, but probably more like 98% of all those authors, even if they're full-time authors, cannot make a living off of what they're making. They've got money coming from a spouse or investments or some other source. And that is still true today. I'm a full-time author. I don't, there have been years where I make great amounts of money that support me. There are years where I lose money on my writing. And I think I have other income. Just you can't do it just on that unless you hit the lottery. So that's why I think there are people out there using AI. They either want this fame or they think they're going to get rich, and it ain't going to work. But it does potentially devalue what we're doing. And part of that is because the purpose of writing, of art, the art of writing, in my opinion, or of any art, but in particular in writing, why do we do it? We're writing about human beings. We're writing about human beings. Well, not always. We're writing for readers. We're writing about the human experience so that our readers, human beings, can understand something about being human. It's all about humans talking to other humans about being human. There's no real spot for AI in that other than for us to talk about what it means to be human compared to an AI. And an AI can never, ever, ever understand what it's like to be human because it's an AI. Even if it became sentient, it could only understand what it's like to be a sentient AI. Any no more than I could understand what it's like to be a sentient cow if they ever became sentient. And then the final problem is that AI, the way it works now, and I don't think this is going to change anytime in the near future unless they rebuild it from the ground up. But the way it works right now is it is an aggregator. Okay. So it will take all my work and all everybody else's work and put it together and say, here's how you tell a story, because this is the average of what it's all doing. The problem with that is it can't be creative in a great way. It can't take those chances. Even if you tell it to, it can't do it because it aggregates. So they did, and the best example I have of this is there was an experiment done with, they took an AI that had not been taught anything. They trained it on the works of Shakespeare, just Shakespeare. And then they said, write us a Shakespearean sonnet. And it did.
Wow.
And it was a good Shakespearean sonnet.
Ugh.
But that's all it will ever be, is an average good Shakespearean sonnet. It could never get to be a great one, because that's if it started to write something great, it would pull it back, because its job is to only write average. It will never be the complete worst. It will never be the complete best. It can never take those chances. It's not designed to do that. And so that's why the fear is that all those misguided intentions mixed with the very averageness of what AI can do, even when it becomes much better at what it's doing, if it becomes so ubiquitous that we have a flood of averageness, I think then ultimately people will, they might go to it for entertainment for whatever reason, but I think in the majority what will happen is the people who love reading, or go to read for the reason we go to any kind of art form, will go to something else. And it won't be movies if movies do the same thing. It won't, any kind of art that uses AI that way won't be it. We will discover some art form that only humans can do. Maybe it'll be, I don't know. I was just an example, and for now, chainsaw sculpture out of ice and wood or whatever, right? At the moment, that's pretty much what I mean, I guess you could program a robot to do it, but pretty much it's a performative thing, right? It's kind of like music even now. It's people want to go see live music because then there's a human being performing it. And that's why arts has always been, is we're communicating with each other. So I don't think it will be the end of art, but I do think AI could kill the art forms that we enjoy now. We'll just find something else. And that was probably more of an answer than you wanted, but that's the flood of thoughts on
Well,
AI.
I need to hear this kind of stuff because I'm fascinated by it. I use it for different ones all day long for different things. I love it medically because I mean there are a couple of things that popped up in the last few weeks. Do I go call my doctor? Do I go running and AI and oh wow, and I did this and boop 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 boop, and it obviated one of my favorite words. It obviated a visit, at least on the front end,
Yeah.
to one of my doctors.
The big problem right now, you have to be careful, is with AI, is that AI lies.
It makes mistakes. Yeah, it does.
It makes mistakes, but it outright lies. It just makes stuff up. This just happened a couple weeks ago. I think it was the New York Times put out a 10 great books to read this summer. And it was a list of 10 books. And um, one of them that caught my eye was a book by Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, which was made into a movie, and some other great books. He's a fantastic science fiction writer, and it had his name in this a new book and a paragraph about what it's about. The only problem is it doesn't exist. He didn't write it. It's not a real book. It completely
Wow.
made the whole thing up.
Wow.
So, and there were other books in that list that it completely made up, because everyone was calling up Andy Weir going, "You got a new book coming out?" He's like, "No, what are you talking about?" So, yeah, right now you can't even trust what
Yeah.
AI is saying. So, anyway.
Oh well. The last thing, just real quick, you have a spin-off series, the Marshall Drummond Case Files.
Uh-huh.
Talk a little bit about that and things that people can look forward to, and then we're gonna wrap.
Sure. So Marshall Drummond, this is a series about the ghost detective back when he was alive in the 30s and 40s, and it's short stories and novellas about him. And there are coincidentally 19 of them out right now, and
Wow.
you can get them as ebooks, or if you prefer paper books, I put them in collections as well. But the thing is, I started writing it simply because, as I mentioned, I write 3 to 4 books a year, but I go switch between series. I usually have 2 to 3 series going on at the same time,
Mm.
so that I stay interested. if all of my books were Max Porter books, I would be doing a lot financially, a lot better. Um, Max Porter is half my income every year, but I would have been bored. I probably would have, the series would have probably fizzled out already at this point. 60, I mean, not just because there would have been 60 of them, but I could, to write four of the same book over and over again every year would have been maddening. So by switching around to things, it keeps me excited. But that means that the fans only get one, or on a good year, two Max Porter books, and that's it. And readers are fast. They're the core of your audience is always these super fast readers. So when I put out a new Max Porter book and it launches and I drop in the morning on Facebook and everything, hey, there's a new Max Porter book out. By the end of that day, I usually get an email that says, uh, bought it, loved it, read it, loved it. It's great. When's the next one?
Wow.
And it's a wonderful problem to have. This is not complaining at all, but the fact is that I got to then say, well, you're gonna have to wait. You're gonna have to wait six
Yeah.
months to a year before there's gonna be
Wow.
another one. So I started writing these short stories about Marshall Drummond just to get them off my back.
Yeah.
Because if I put the book out and then 2 months, 3 months later there's a short story, it keeps people happy, and it keeps the characters in their heads. And so it started out really just as a way to keep my sanity. And then they did well. I mean, short stories are not generally big sellers, but these sell well. They're fun to write. Whereas the Max Porter series takes real history and mixes it with all these magical things. I decided to just skip the real history. These are meant to be short and quick and fun, and I just write them, and they're just a blast. And it's fun to see this character in his living days and the world he had in that time period. And I don't do it much, but I do let the two inform each other. You don't have to. You can read one series without the other. You don't have to read them together. But I do put little Easter eggs in, especially in the Max Porter books. I might have Marshall Drummond reference something that just an off comment or
Yeah.
something, and the people who've read the short stories, they know, and that's fun.
Brilliant. That tie-in is brilliant, by the way. It's great marketing, great, but your mind, I marvel at your mind,
Thank
your
you.
creativity. I listen, I know what it's like in a small way, uh, um, uh, to write, and I feel it, but I absolutely marvel at you, Stuart Jaffe, and so we've come to the end of this. Actually, it's a 101 course in publishing and hybrid and all this stuff. This was great. You were great. I'm just so glad we got connected because it's so relevant. It's so relevant for 300,000 people who publish every year,
Mhm.
and you were an absolute delight and giving and sharing all this stuff. So I thank you and come back. I sit in this chair 12 hours a day. If I want to just sit and kind of chat and I'm going to tell my little writing group all about this interview and to check you out and Kay and I thank you so much, truly.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'll take you up on that. I'll be happy to come back on the show anytime.
Great, and I will take you up on that because I love my little writing group, to get to know you because you're prolific, and it's nice to be prolific, and you've got to have a mind to be prolific, and so I marvel at the mind. Thank you, thank you. I'm going to stop recording. We'll do a 2-minute wrap. Don't leave. Stay right there. Thank you, Stuart.